Hey everybody. Uh, I've had a lot of people asking me questions about how to get images with the text going around them, or kind of get images side by side, or a few other questions about how you position things on the page. So today I'm going to spend time talking to you about the ways that you can do that. You can use floats with clears, you can use inline blocks, and you can use the positioning property in order to move stuff around and position stuff the way you like it. So I'm going to go through those quickly one at a time so that you can try experimenting with them on your page today. Um, so as I mentioned, like lots of people, and you look at the web and you don't have images just on their own line like this. Like you see here, I've got my site devoted to cats. I've got Mr. Meow Meow, Princess, Snugglepuss, Nom Nom, and of course my favorite Professor X. Now, all these guys are on their own line, and that's the way normal HTML works, and I don't want that. What I really want is I want to have these four guys kind of all together up here, and this guy to be down here with the text kind of flowing around him. So how do I do that? Well, if you want to have the text flowing around an image, basically the way to do it is with a float. Now, fortunately, using a float this way is really easy. All you do is you open up your CSS, and first of all, I want to point out that here are my cats, and I've got them in a div with a class called cats, and that goes same for Professor X. He's in a class called cats too. He's also got a different ID on it for a reason that I'll show you later, but for right now, we know that if I want to do some style on all of those cats pictures, all I have to do is use a class selector. So that's what I'm going to do right now. I've got this .cats class selector that gives it a solid 3-pixel border that's black. It's got a 10-pixel margin on it, and the background color is yellow-green, right? You see that all right there. So if I want the text to flow around Professor X there, what I have to do is I have to type float and then left, and then save it and refresh. And that's all there is to it. See, take a look. It goes right along the side now. It's not on its own line. And if I move this in, you see that the text continues down underneath it, right? Now, if I wanted the text to just be next to Professor X and not go underneath, what I'd have to do is I'd have to put this text in its own div. And I'd still just float this div, and the text would be right next to it. It wouldn't go underneath. But all you need to know is that the float helps bring this text over, not push everything underneath it. Now, one of the things I did with these paragraphs is I gave them, also gave them borders, 3-pixel borders, to show you that the reason why it's called a float is because the floated element is actually kind of above the page. If you take a look at the border for the paragraph, you'll see that it actually goes underneath the image. It doesn't stop right next to the image. And that's important to know, because let's say you think like, oh, I really want some more space between this picture and this paragraph. Well, normally you could say, well, I can make a margin left on the paragraph, and I'll give it like 20 pixels, 25 pixels, and then I'd move this over to the right? Except that when you reload the page, you'll see that the margin left pushes the paragraph from this point all the way on the left where the border is to the right. So when you have a floated element, you can't create space by choosing the element underneath. So I'm just going to get rid of that. And what I have to do is I have to give a margin on this particular picture. So I know that I gave Professor X an ID called Lone Cat. So if I go up here to Lone Cat, I can say margin right 25 pixels, save it, and look, now I've got more space on the right. So if I want to create a margin on a floated element, I have to actually use the floated element to create the margin, not whatever's next to it that's not floated. Okay? So now if I scroll up to the top here, you can see that I've got these four images, these 4 cat images, all floated with text next to it. But what you'll also notice is it's got this text over here, and the background is actually not going all the way down to the bottom. This background is part of a div. And the reason why this isn't going all the way underneath these guys is because floated elements kind of hang out outside of the div. Usually the div is however big the stuff inside it is. So if I had a paragraph inside of this div, it would go down here. And if I had an image that wasn't floated inside of the div like I did before, it would go down and cover the image. But now it's floating, so the div kind of doesn't even think it's there. And so that's a bit of a problem. Another problem that I have is that if I move this to the right, now look, I've got a picture down here. In some cases, that might be useful. Maybe you want them to do that. But for me, what I don't want it to keep moving around. I want all my images kind of in one place. So I want it to be 4 across like this always. And I don't really want the text over here to be shifting around, and I want this background color to go all the way down below. So what I'm going to do is I am going to do a couple of things. First, it's useful to me whenever you have images that you want, or floats that you want side by side, and you don't want them to move around, what you can do is you can put them inside of a div and then give that div a width. You specify a fixed width. What that does is that says, okay, this div needs to be this width. So let's see, I think that particular div is new cats. I'm going to double check it. So here's the div ID, new cats, right? So I will go here and I will say width, how about, let's see, 1130. And I'll hit save. Okay, so now you can see that my div's width changed, but these cats still aren't inside of the div exactly. So this is a problem with floats. Floats need to be cleared so that the other stuff doesn't kind of flow around it. And so you're basically saying like, okay, I'm done putting stuff, stacking stuff next to each other, right? So there are a couple of different ways to do that. One of the ways is to do an overflow inside of your CSS. You do an overflow property like overflow hidden, and then save it and refresh, and you'll see that now my background goes all the way down below it, and this text is down here. Unfortunately, sometimes when you do that overflow hidden, it can mess up in certain browsers. So there's actually a better way to do it. What you have to do is you have to search for micro clear fix. And there are going to be a few links here. This one is by the guy who created it, a guy named Nick Gallagher, I guess. And some of the links that have it will use .cf and some will use .group. Just remember that the dot before it means that it is a class selector. So all you have to do is make sure that whichever one you pick, if you decide to use that .cf instead of the .class, .group, that you you select on the group or the CF. So here in new cats, I am going to do class equals group. So now I've got a class to select on called group. I'm going to go into cats.css, and I'm going to take everything here except for this IE 6 and 7 thing, because I don't need IE 6 and 7 because those are really old and nobody supports them anymore. And I'm going to paste that in and save it, and then I will go back to my HTML and refresh, and you'll see, oh, I didn't save this, did I? No, I did not. So now I refresh, and it looks exactly the way you'd expect it to look. So there are a couple other things I can do to make this look nice. I want this div to kind of hang out right in the middle and not be off to one side. So I can go to my new cats div and say margin left auto, margin right auto, and save it and refresh. And now it will be right in the middle of the screen. So all I have to do is set the left and right margins to auto, and look what I've got here. This nice 4-picture bar with cats. And you'll notice if I shrink it down, once it gets too small, it puts a scroll bar here so that my page is going to look identical no matter what. I'm not going to have these guys moving around. That's exactly what I want. So that is basically the way that you use floats and clears. So just know that if you do micro, you're going to have to search for micro clear fix, and probably at first you're just going to have to copy and paste. Just remember that if you copy and paste the one that says .cf, then on the div that you want to have look like this, you have to go into it and give it a class that's CF, right? So for me, that was the div with the ID new cats. Okay, so I mentioned that there's actually another way to do this. Well, what you can do instead of floating left, you can actually do something called an inline block. So if I say display inline block here in this cats class and save it, you'll see that it does mostly the same thing. It puts these three together and then it throws this one down. The reason why it isn't identical is because when you use inline block, it creates a little bit of extra space. The way that you get around that is you say, rather than making it a 9-pixel, or maybe like you leave it as 10 pixels, but you extend the width by, I don't know, like 100 or something, and refresh, and now they all fit together on the same line again. So you just have to know, oh, okay, if I'm going to use the inline block, it's going to create a little bit of extra space, and I have to account for that. Now, one of the problems with inline block is it doesn't allow text to flow around it like a float does. So if you're trying to do something like this where you put all the pictures in a row, that's great. But if you are trying to do something like this, you pretty much have to use a float if you want the text to go around it. One of the things that you'll see inline block used a lot for is for horizontal navigation, where you've got all the buttons like here, 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 and here. That's a great use for inline block. You can try experimenting with both of them and see, sometimes floats can be hard to clear, so you want to use an inline block. Sometimes inline blocks, because of the space that is created, is not ideal. You can do things to cope with that, including changing the margins so that instead of having 10 pixels, you would make it a little bit less than that to compensate. That's up to you. So, so far we've seen floats, clears, and inline blocks. I'm going to change this back to the way it was because I really liked my cats thing the way it was before. Oh, by the way, I should show you this while I'm thinking about it. If you float right instead of float left, all it does is it puts those pictures over on the right. Yeah, it actually reverses them. You see, like Mr. Meow Meow was over here, now it's over there. Princess was over here, now it's over there. It kind of displays them backwards, puts them on the right. So if you want your image, like lone image over on the right, then you use float right. It doesn't really matter whether you float right or float left one of these images, or these 4 images. So it's really just a case where you kind of want to have things line up on the right side instead of the left. All right, so we've got that out of the way. Now let's talk a little bit about positioning. The positioning property can be a little complicated seeming, so I'm going to try to explain this as best I can. I'm going to use this as a teaching tool. I've got these color blocks, 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? And I've got some text underneath them. I've got it inside of a pink div, right? So there are 4 types of positioning. There is static positioning, which is just what normally is used by the browser. And then there's relative positioning, where the image moves relative to its initial position. Then there's absolute positioning, where the element that you're moving is put exactly where you specify in the viewport. And then there's something called fixed positioning, where the item stays in the same spot on the screen no matter where you are on it. I know that's a bit complicated seeming. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So let's go over here. I've got these div IDs. Well, the first div ID is called container. That's what I've got my stuff inside. Then I've got div ID 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. If I look at the CSS for it, right now, what I have is just a bunch of squares, basically. Nothing more complicated than that. Hopefully, that's easy to see. So let's say I want to use, right now I'm using static positioning because I don't have anything specified. Let's say, however, I want to use relative positioning. So what I would do is say position relative, right? Now I save it and reload, and nothing's changed. That's because I haven't actually changed the position yet. But if I did, you would see it move. So one of the things I can do is say, all right, I am going to move the position relative to the number 1 relative to its initial position by I don't know, like 50 or 100 pixels. So what I do is I type left 100 pixels. What that means is it's going to be 100 pixels off of its initial left position. So that actually, even though it says left, what it's doing is it's moving it right. See? So it moved 100 pixels over. If I wanted to move it down 100 pixels, I would say from the top, move it 100 pixels. That means 100 pixels off of its top initial position. And there, now it's moved down 100 pixels too. If I were to get rid of this left and just keep the top, you would see that it's kind of hanging out over these guys, right? But I'm not going to do that. I don't want to hide them because I want to point out something, which is that these 3 elements all keep their initial positions when I use relative positioning. It's important to note because it's not always the case. So with relative positioning, it moves relative to where it started. So if I had this guy, let's do number 3, and said that it's also going to be positioned relative. If I say left 200 pixels or 100 pixels, it's not going to end up in the same place as this one. It's going to move to the right from where it started. So let's save it and refresh, and you see that's exactly what it did. That is not true for absolute positioning. When I'm doing an absolute position, what I'm saying is basically the top is the top of the browser screen, the part of the body that you can see. So the top would be like right up here. And left would be over here. Bottom would be here. It wouldn't be at the very bottom of the page down here. It's going to be at the bottom of the part that you can see. And then the right would be somewhere over here, right? So here, I've changed this from relative to absolute. I'm going to save it, and you'll see number 1 is going to move way over here. So it's 100 pixels from the top of the screen and 100 pixels to the left. It has nothing at all to do with where it started. What you'll also notice is that number 2, number 3, and number 4 all scooted up. That's because once you use an absolute position, it's kind of like the element that you positioned isn't affecting anything else anymore. They all scoot up to take the place. It's like it's not there. It's similar to a float, I guess, right? So the advantage of absolute position is that you can say, like, if I want it to be 100 pixels from the left, it's always going to be 100 pixels from the left. No matter how wide this is, it's always going to stay there. It has nothing to do with the size of the screen. But usually what absolute position is used for is to position something within a div, right? Because when you're creating a website, you don't know if somebody has a really high resolution screen and that's really wide, or kind of a small screen. So what you want to do is you want to position elements not necessarily from the edge of the window, but more from the edge of a fixed element that you know about. So this div, this container div, is fixed. I know its width. So what I can do is I can say, I want this to be 100 pixels off of here. Well, how do I do that? If I want to use a fixed position or absolute position, what I do is I still say absolute, but then what I do is I take this container and I make its position relative, because the absolute positioning happens from the first parent that has a relative position. So this container, as you recall, is the parent. Here's div ID 1, and here's div ID container. So this ID container is a parent of 1, 2, 3, and 4. If I position this, save it, now you'll see that 1 is 100 pixels to the left of here and 100 pixels from the top of here. Now that's sort of the same as relative, except all this other stuff moves too. What I've seen this sort of setup used for is a lot of times people will want to have something that's hanging off to the left of a container div. So they might say like minus 50 pixels, right? Like that. Or maybe even all the way outside, so minus 100. And fresh. And now, like, say you wanted to have your navigation, like a little navigation square or rectangle over here next to your main div. You would just have to put the relative position on the main div and then an absolute position on your nav bar and stick it over to the left, and it would always be right next to that without any fuss. It's really quite simple compared to dealing with floats sometimes. So there's that. One of the other things that I want to point out is you notice that these positioned divs can hang out over each other. I'll even move 3 back so that you'll see that we'll do it like 25 pixels to the left. So you see that they can kind of be over each other, and I'll even do top minus 25 as well. So there. So they're all over each other. One of the things that you can use is a z-index. What the z-index property does is it says this one needs to be on top. So I'm going to make this z-index 1. Number 2, I'll make z-index 10. And number 1, I'll make z-index 5. The numbers don't matter. What it is it's the relation. So the item with the highest z-index is always going to be on top of anything with a lower z-index. So if I refresh, you'll see that number 1 Oh, right. Number 1 isn't actually over number 2. Let me move it a little bit closer to the top, and then so clearly I've done something wrong. Um, I'll make the z-index 100. Not today. All right, well, you'll have to take my word for it, I guess. Normally, the z-index is there. What sets it one thing on top of another, and a higher z-index is better. Oops, I don't think I put a space there. That's probably what it is. Nope. Don't know. You'll have to experiment with it a bit. I don't know what I did. I missed something, obviously. Suffice it to say that if the way it's supposed to work is when you put a higher z-index on something, it pops to the top. It should work for you. If it doesn't, then just blame me. Lastly, I want to talk about fixed position. Now, you'll notice that I have this red bar up at the top, and if you were, I don't know, keeping an eye on things, you'll notice that I had this same bar up at the top of my cats thing, and as I scrolled down, that bar stayed at the top of the page. That's because I used a fixed position. So if I go to my menu, that's what I called that particular div. Div ID equals menu. If I go there and I type position fixed and hit save, well, it disappears entirely. Let me try that again. I'm going to copy it in. So I've got position fixed, and then I've set it fixed to the top at 0 and to the left at 0. I've given it a width of 100% and a z-index of 100, and I'll change that to 200 so that it's always on top. And for some reason it's not working. Well, you'll just have to ignore this part of the demo and take it for granted that that will work. I can show you that in cats.cs I've got my menu here with the same stuff. Oh, you know what? I bet it is. No, don't know. Anyway, I do the same thing here, and it works on my cats page. So what you'll have to do, I guess, is look up how fixed positioning works. I've already kind of run long, so I'm going to stop here and send you on your way. Ask me questions about the stuff that didn't work if you have issues, or Google it, because obviously I am doing something around there. Anyway, best of luck, guys.